What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Nerd Confirmed, the channel that confirms the nerd in all of us. This is a very special episode where we're talking about our games of the year for 2020. That's right, that awful year that nobody wants to remember, but it was a pretty good one for video games. And we've got a top 5 list for you coming up right now. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see everything I've got coming out in 2021 and beyond. Now let's get back to our top 5 video games of 2020. So first up, before we get to our top 5 of 2020, I want to give a couple shout outs to honorable mentions. Games that didn't quite make the cut, but were still impactful on me in 2020 and nearly made it into my top 5. Now, I was lucky enough to get to play roughly 30 games that came out in 2020. And these two games were some of the best. The first one being Animal Crossing New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch. Now, Animal Crossings is a game that kind of became the perfect 2020 game. It came out right in March when quarantine sort of took over the world, and it created a bit of a zeitgeist. People that I knew who hadn't played video games in a decade picked up this game and were loving it. And my wife played it, and that's a testament to the attractiveness and the appeal of this game. It's got all the Nintendo polish, all the Nintendo pacing, all the charm that you would expect in an Animal Crossing game and a Nintendo game. And it really was a soothing, relaxing game to enjoy with family or friends or just solo. Building up your island, going through daily routines of fishing, building up things, cleaning up weeds, talking to the villagers, paying off Tom Nook. It just really was a game that soothed so many people's souls, I think, during such a scary time in the world. And it really spoke to kind of the need for video games as therapy, as a release for the world's stresses. And I think reinforced the fact that video games are art, and they're beautiful and they're fun and they're charming and they're cute, just as much as they're violent and shooty and explodey, right? Nintendo does that better than anyone. For me, Animal Crossing's gameplay loop didn't quite give me the payoff I wanted by the time, credits rolled. So it didn't, that's why it's not a little higher on my list. I would have liked to have maybe had a little more variety in sort of what was there, like maybe some more mini games, things like that to sort of keep me engaged outside of just finding new items to put on my island, cleaning up, talking to villagers. But overall, the game that's there is an instant classic. I think it's an all-timer for so many people, and I'm proud to put it on my honorable mentions list. The next game on my honorable mentions list is one that nearly cracked the top 5, and that's Streets of Rage 4. Now, I played this game when it came out on Game Pass for Xbox, and I just instantly fell in love with this game. The gameplay in this beat 'em up is just a perfect return to the genre. Buttery smooth. It's so addicting. The unlockable characters and different hidden items and Easter eggs in the game were really fun to find, and just the appeal to the retro fans of the retro games was very apparent. They obviously it was a love letter to beat 'em up fans and fans of Streets of Rage, and it just was such a fun game. I gave it a very glowing review on my channel, and it just really captured my imagination and my love for video games. I felt like I was back in 1990 or 1991, as a kid playing video games and having just such a visceral, fun reaction. And it just was a joy to play. The soundtrack is perfect video game soundtrack, beaten out by only other one game this year for me, and we'll get to that later on the list. But Streets of Rage 4, just such a fun game. I recommend it to everyone. It's on Game Pass. It's out on all platforms. Check it out. It really deserves your time. And now we're on to the top 5 games of 2020. And this was a tough list to make because I played a lot of really great games in 2020. And there were also some games that might have cracked the top 5, but I didn't get around to playing. Most notably, The Last of Us Part 2, I played a little bit of, maybe 4 or 5 hours, but not enough to officially add it to my list. Doom Eternal, I didn't get all the way through. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Spider-Man Miles Morales. So there are some that could potentially have made it, but I have to say, I believe this top 5 list is still worthy of distinction. And I'm going to start with a game that maybe some people have overlooked. It's actually quite underrated, but I think it's one of the best games of the year, and that is Dreams for the PS4 by Media Molecule. Dreams is a game that might have steered people away from it for a number of reasons. One being it was kind of in perceived development hell for a while. Media Molecule revealed it back in, I think, 2011, 2012. I'm not sure if it was that long ago, but it was a while ago. And it just sort of went away for a long time. It eventually came out sort of in an early access trial in 2019, but it wasn't fully released until February of 2020. Now, another reason people might have been turned away from Dreams is that they saw it as more of a game making tool set rather than a game, where in fact it's more of a suite, so to speak. Dreams is both indie game repository and game dev tool set. It really is both. On one side, you have this tool set that allows you to make almost anything you can dream of, but in reality, you can make any kind of game you want: a shooter, an RPG, an action game, a platformer, a puzzle game, yada yada yada. You don't have to make a game. You can make music, you can make a piece of art, you can make 3D models, you can make like a mini movie, you can make graphic novels, so many types of. It doesn't have to be visual. It could be audio, it could be visual medium, it could be kind of anything you want. Their tool set is very robust. The quality of the tutorials is very, very high. They really walk you through the different things that you can do from beginner to a little bit more advanced, and really give you the knowledge that you need to go in and start making something that is of high quality, whether it's a game or not. And as on the game side, you've got some of the most creative, interesting, fan-made projects using this tool set that I could have imagined. The included one, Art's Dream, is really, really special. Art's Dream is like a 2.5-3 hour game made by Media Molecule to kind of showcase all the different things that you can do with the tool set in Dreams. It would have been on my list for one of the best indie games of the year, Art's Dream, if it had been a standalone title. But the fact that it's just sort of the intro game for this larger experience is really, really impressive. The game has visual novel aspects, it has arcade shoot 'em up aspects, it's got puzzle solving, it's got all kinds of different elements to this really short game, and it really does a good job of showing off just how well the tool set allows developers and artists and creators to make anything that they can think about. The game got a little overlooked. I got really, really into it. I didn't expect to. I'm not a huge Little Big Planet fan. That sounds weird to say. I'm not a Little Big Planet fan. I didn't really like the idea of like being pushed to make things in this game. When it came to Little Big Planet, I just wanted to play a platformer, and I didn't really feel like the platforming was very tight or good. It wasn't very fun. Whereas in this game, I don't have to play platformers. If I don't like that, I can play any type of game I want, or make any type of game that I want. I ended up getting the platinum trophy in this game. It took me 60 plus hours. It was a lot of work. It took a lot of patience, but it really forced me to dive into the different tool sets available to me, whether it be sculpting, music making, making objects move in space, how to do the different painting tutorials, all these different tool sets that we had to use to get the platinum trophy really exposed me to this game in a way that I might not have before. But I had a much more of an appreciation for the things that people were creating, the game repository, than I probably would have otherwise. really Dreams just is one of the best PlayStation exclusives I think ever made. It's the fact that you can make so many different things so easily. There are a lot of things that will take you a lot of time and are very difficult, but the quality will be very high. And people are still making really quality games and experiences in Dreams over a year later, and well, at least from early access. So it's almost in 2 years of early access now, and it's just been an amazing experience, and I think it really deserves a spot in our top 5 games of the year for 2020. All right, well, that brings us to game number 4 on our games of the year for 2020 list, and it's one that might be met with a little bit of controversy. And I think that word lets you know exactly which one I'm talking about. Yes, I'm talking about Cyberpunk 2077 from CD Projekt Red. Cyberpunk 2077 was a controversial game when it released because of all the things that you probably know about. It was buggy. It didn't run on base previous generation hardware, as in PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. It was still buggy even on PC. It wasn't quite the game that people thought they were getting. There was a number of things about the game that CD Projekt Red kind of promised or indicated was going to be there, and ultimately felt a little shallow compared to some of the depth that they had indicated was going to be in the game. While I agree the game isn't very deep overall, it's very wide. It's like a big shallow pool. You can't dive too deep, but there's a lot of space to explore. And I don't just mean the size of the open world. I mean the plethora of side missions and character interactions and environments that you do get to see are quite varied. And there's so many different paths in this game that I didn't think we were going to take. I'm about 70 hours into this game, and I've done mostly side missions. I'm very close to beating it. I've played enough of it, I think, to be able to put it at my number 4 spot. I do happen to know some of the end game and main story stuff, so that's unfortunate, but that's okay. I'm enjoying the heck out of this game, and the thing that really has drawn me into this game is the character interactions, whether it be Pan Am, who I'm going to marry, Judy, Rogue. All these characters are just, they're easy to love. They're easy to kind of hate at first too. There's a lot of sort of like figuring out like what the dynamic is here, and who has power, who has what information, all that kind of stuff. But then you start to really see that these people are in this world struggling just like your character is, just like V is. And we're all just trying to make it a better place, and in this sort of corporate controlled future dystopia. And I think that they really nailed that. There's a lot of really fun gameplay. The gunplay in this game is very smooth. It's very good. I like the variation of guns and the different weapons that you can get. I mean, you can fight with katanas and shotguns and smart pistols that have like tracking bullets and stuff. So I went the super pistol handgun route on my build. So I built up, what is it, reflexes, I think. Now I get crazy critical headshots all the time with my pistol, and I'm just like this crazy powerful tank that just one-shots everybody almost. Really, really loving it. I wasn't expecting to, I was hoping I was going to love it. It's a different game a little bit than I thought it was going to be. It's very much more of a Fallout game than it is a kind of its own new thing. But that's fine, because I like Fallout, and I think I know it has a lot of bugs, and Fallout is known for being a buggy mess, but it's unfortunate that they share that in common. But another thing they share in common is a lot of really fun gameplay, Western RPG philosophies about, character interactions and environments and gameplay and things like that I really appreciate. So Cyberpunk is definitely a game worth your time if you are into gunplay and open world RPGs, Western Fallout style RPGs that maybe don't go super deep. They do on some things, but for the most part, it's just a really big, fun place to run around and do a bunch of cool side quests. And Keanu Reeves is cool too. Now we're moving on to number 3 on our list, and that is Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima is a game that I didn't really know what to expect when it was announced. I thought maybe it might be more of a Sekiro Souls-like type of game. And then the more I saw of it, it turned out to be closer to an Assassin's Creed. And that's really what it ended up kind of being. It was sort of the Assassin's Creed set in feudal Japan that we had always wanted to see. And the gameplay really bore that out in terms of the combat style, although the combat style was sort of its own thing and ended up being really fluid and intuitive and very fun, switching between different stances, whether you were fighting somebody with a sword or a shield or a spear or facing off against a brute, plus the mythic moves that allowed you to, one kill, somebody with a quick draw of your sword, or light your sword on fire and quickly kill enemies. And the different armors and stuff like that really played into how sort of classic Assassin's Creed has played out. There are a lot of really cool side missions that are very similar to Assassin's Creed, where it's like, oh, go follow these people from this one point to this next point and wait for them to sort of confirm that they're the ones who are behind this plot, or they're planning to do this other thing, and then you rush in and take everybody out. Very Assassin's Creed like, but very beautiful. Assassin's Creed was one of my favorite series, so while I went into this game with a little trepidation, not really sure what I was getting into, I ended up really enjoying the pacing of the game and the way it sort of played out over its side missions. The main story was, to me, a bit lackluster, is a bit predictable, but I really ended up falling in love with the main characters. Just like with Cyberpunk, it was the characters that you interact with and form bonds with and relationships with that kept me really, really engaged with the game, even more so than sort of just the plot itself. It just was a nice combination of this action style game that we're sort of used to, along with an interesting story and enough really fun side quests and cool trophies on the PlayStation 4 to keep me going until I eventually platinumed the whole thing. I really think that this game shines when you look at the base game along with the DLC that came out for it, the multiplayer DLC. It's amazing the work that they put into this game, and I can't wait to see what the sequel comes up with. But so far, this was definitely a great game, worthy of our number 3 spot on the Game of the Year 2020 list. So now that we're at the number 2 spot on our list, I have to say that these next 2 games were really duking it out. When I was deliberating what to put on my list and kind of ranking the games that I loved most out of all of them that I played from 2020, these next 2 games, these top 2 games, really have a special place in my heart, and are really exemplary of just the amazing feelings and experiences that you can have with video games. I think that they both are legendary games that deserve to be played by everybody, whether you are fans of their genres or not. And they're both games that the genres either have a lot of fans or maybe turn some people off. But I think these are games that sort of bridge those divides better than maybe any other games out there in their genres. And the first game that I'm going to talk about that very nearly became the number 1 game of the year for me, but at number 2 is Hades. Now, Hades came out and I was paying kind of no attention to it. The only reason it was sort of on my radar was that it was from Supergiant Games, and I really loved Bastion and the other games that they've made, Transistor, Pyre, things like that. Other than that, I don't know, it didn't really capture my attention very much, and the only reason I ended up picking it up was, one, because it came out on the Switch and was instantly marked down, and I had, I think, like some points to spend, so I think I got it for like $15 when it's normally 25 or something like that. But number 2, and maybe more to the point, this game was being talked about so much on social media, and just all of the games industry seemed to be playing it all at once. All of a sudden, I was like, what is this Hades game about? And so because it was cheap, I said, well, I'll check it out. I'm not really into these roguelite genre before. I haven't played a lot of the games, but it just, something about it is like, I don't know if I'm going to get super into this game. Like, I don't know if that's a game that I'm going to get want to keep playing because I'm going to get frustrated having to start over, repeat over and over again. But that's not what this game is at all. You're constantly progressing, playing as Zagreus, the son of Hades, living in the underworld and trying your best to desperately escape over and over again, get out of the underworld, for very good reasons that I won't spoil. But there's a very, I think every human can connect with these gods in a lot of ways. You know, the gods reflect a lot of the worst in humanity, but in this game they do that, but also reflect some of the best, and really capture some of the motivations that make you feel for Zagreus and fall in love with so many of the characters. There's so many different characters from Greek mythology, and some that are sort of added in new. And oh man, just there's so much personality in this game. There's so much story. The game is very long, so I ended up getting my full 10 runs, credits rolled and everything. And that took me probably 55 to 60 hours to get credits to roll. When that happened, I felt like I'd opened up an entirely new game. Like there was so much to do afterwards, and the way the story unfolds and what happens, you know, what you finally accomplish, and that end credit scene, and your I don't want to spoil any of it for anybody, because I really I can't recommend this game enough. It's an all-time great game. It is an instant classic. Probably the best roguelike game that's ever been made. The gameplay is so tight. The combat is so fluid. The individual randomly generated levels are very short. They don't take a long time to beat each one, and you constantly feel like you're making progress, getting to choose between the different power-ups that you want to go for, whether it's a kind of a basic level one or a harder version with a little skull on it. Deciding, you know, do you want to spend your coins to potentially get a really good upgrade, or do you see a room that's going to give you like the Daedalus hammer, or something that's very important to get if you want to try and get through the full run and beat Hades at the end. And there's so many things I could say about this game, but it took me completely by surprise. I was completely obsessed with this game when it came out. My kids were like, man, you're still playing this game? Like, I was playing it constantly, and it runs so buttery smooth on the Switch. It is just well done, Supergiant Games. It is just a joy to play Hades. I love this game. It easily could have been my number one. It's almost like a 1B to my number one. Like it is truly a masterpiece. I am so happy that I happened to pick this game up the day it came out on Switch. This is another game like Dreams that was in early access for a long time. And I think both of these games are examples of early access working how it's planned to be. They refine over time, listen to feedback, tighten the game up so well that it just is perfect. It's a perfect game. It is a 10 out of 10. Hades is one of the best games ever made, in my opinion. I love this game, and I can't recommend it enough. Number 2 on my 2020 Games of the Year list, Hades. But now, with games 5 through 2 out of the way, that brings us to our number 1 game of 2020. Without further ado, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a game that I couldn't have dreamt up in my wildest imagination. Final Fantasy VII is maybe the most important game to me that's ever been made. It reshaped the way I think about video games. It reshaped the way I feel about the medium of video games. It took video games from fun pastime that I was obsessed with as a kid to art. Art in the way that it can make me feel any emotion. It can make me experience any world, any dream. Final Fantasy VII did that for me, and I know it did it for so many other people. It's a very special game. And when they announced that Final Fantasy VII was going to be remade, I think they announced it back in 2015 after a lot of fan feedback. You know, I thought that they were just going to kind of remake the game as is with pretty graphics, but basically the same gameplay, same story, everything like that. That is so far from what they ended up doing. Square Enix. They took Final Fantasy VII, its essence and its characters, and fleshed out the first 5 to 8 hours of the game, of the original game, into a full, 40-hour game that, in my opinion, had no fluff, no fat on it at all. This was all meat, and it was just so perfectly juicy. I love this game. I wouldn't say as much as Final Fantasy VII. I would say they're hard to compare for me because there truly are two different games. But I put it with Final Fantasy VII. Like it belongs with the original for me now, and it's hard to explain how I feel other than just to say it is worthy of being spoken about in the same breath as the original. It takes so much of what I love about Final Fantasy VII and extrapolates it in a way that lets you really get to know these characters and really love them and see the character growth for basically all of them just from this very beginning of the game, like where everybody starts in this game and where they end up. Everybody changes in some way, some a little bit less than others and some way more than others, but everybody has this character growth arc to them. Cloud and Barrett and Tifa and Aerith and everybody has this growth that you grow with them, you change with them, you fall in love with them along the way as you get to know them, whether you liked them at first or not. Cloud's a huge jerk in this game at the beginning, and he was in Final Fantasy VII, the original, but as you go through the game and you experience what Cloud's experiencing along the way, and you see him change, you feel yourself change towards him, and you feel yourself change towards the other characters, and you feel that bond built. And then there's this incredibly engaging story and these really funny and quirky characters that Final Fantasy VII, the original, had, and you could feel it in the dialogue and the way things were animated, but it comes to life so much more in this version just because of the fidelity and the sound and the voiceovers and all that kind of stuff. But it just I can't gush enough about this game, and I could sit here all day talking about the ways in which I love this game. But the gameplay is unbelievably tight and perfect. They did such an awesome job morphing the active time battle system into this, kind of action sort of combat that really, you really have to think about every battle. There's no autopilot in this game. I played it on normal. I didn't play it on the classic, so I hear that one's way easier, which is great, and I might try it out someday. But the normal mode, you really have to keep thinking. You can't take any battles off. Every boss fight is a challenge. Even if you level up, if you find, and there are very few areas in this game that suit itself to sort of over leveling. So even though I tried in a couple spots, I thought I was over leveled at one point, and I got to the next boss and I was not. So they really did a great job of balancing this game, making it a challenge, making you earn every battle. And it makes those story beats pay off so much more because you fought so hard to get there. I cannot wait to see where this series goes now, because it opened up in a way that I could have never imagined. It is so different from the original game, but there are obviously so many beats that still interweave with it that you can tell Square Enix said, well, if we're going to redo one of our most beloved games, we're going to do it with as much, we're going to make it with as much love as it receives. And they really have. And I hope and pray that they continue that mantra and continue that hard work, because Square Enix, you've made one of the greatest games I have ever played in my life. Final Fantasy VII is an absolute joy. I cried, I smiled, big shit-eating grins throughout it. I was invested. I care so much, and I cannot wait to see what the next installment is. Final Fantasy VII Remake, without a doubt, deserves our #1 spot on the Game of the Year list for 2020. Everybody should play this game. Well, guys, we did it. Our top 5 games of 2020 are in the books. Thank you so much for joining me on this ride throughout the year. 2021 promises so many great games. Can't wait to talk about those with you coming up in the future. I will be doing a video on my most anticipated games for 2021, so look out for that. Until then, this is Joe for Nerd Confirmed. Thank you so much for watching.